I wasn't searching for Forbidden's history. I wasn't chasing lost civilizations or erased knowledge. I was researching classical sculpture the way it's taught in universities, marble carving, chisels, abrasion, patience, the slow mastery of Renaissance artisans. Everything neat. Everything explained. Then I found a photograph from the Marble Palace in St. Petersburg. It showed a stone veil. Not carved to look like fabric, but draped like fabric, folded, creased, hanging with gravity. So thin that when light passed through it, the stone became translucent. And that was the moment everything stopped. Making sense. Because marble doesn't behave that way. You cannot carve it into sheets that ripple like silk. You cannot chisel stone until it's thinner than a smartphone screen without it fracturing along its crystalline grain. It doesn't bend. It chips, it crumbles. It fails, yet the veil existed, not just in St. Petersburg, but in Naples, Vienna, Milan, Rome, Istanbul, across churches and palaces on different continents. Attributed to artists who supposedly never met, the official explanation is always the same: exceptional skill, masterful craftsmanship, years of patience, but that explanation collapses the moment you apply physics. Instead of admiration, artistry does not change material limits, skill does not suspend fracture mechanics, and patience does not prevent stone from breaking when pushed beyond its structural tolerance. Once you notice that, you start seeing the pattern everywhere. Take the Veiled Christ in Naples. We're told it was carved in 1753 by Giuseppe Sammartino from a single block of marble. Christ lies beneath a shroud so thin you can see facial contours through the stone. The veil appears wet, clinging to flesh, translucent at its edges, but marble fractures long before reaching that level of thinness. Independent measurements suggest some sections of the veil are around 2 millimeters thick. That is thinner than most modern glass screens. Even with diamond tools and computer-guided carving, modern sculptors struggle to replicate it, and when they try, the results are thicker, stiffer, visibly mechanical. Ask experts how the originals were made and you'll notice something strange. They never explain the process. No step-by-step demonstrations. No failed prototypes. No learning curve. No intermediate work showing thicker, cruder veils evolving toward perfection, because those records don't exist. The same impossible veils appear again and again. The veiled Vestal Virgin in Rome, the veiled Rebecca in Milan, the bust of Modesty in Naples, the veiled Truth in Vienna, all created within a narrow window, 1717 to 1768. No gradual development. No spread over centuries. The earliest examples are as refined as the latest. The technique appears, suddenly fully formed, flourishes for about 50 years, and then vanishes. Even stranger is the network behind these works. Many veiled sculptures are linked to the Corradini family or their direct circle. Antonio Corradini creates several. His student Sammartino creates others. The knowledge doesn't spread outward. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't become standard practice. Then it stops. Why would a revolutionary sculpting method, one that produced some of the most breathtaking works in human history, simply disappear? Why wouldn't every sculptor in Europe learn it? Why wouldn't it be documented, refined, industrialized? Unless it wasn't a carving technique at all. As I looked deeper, I kept encountering references the official histories mentioned briefly, then abandon. Stone softening, not metaphorical, not poetic. Alchemical texts describe specific formulas, plant extracts, acids, mineral compounds that could temporarily render stone pliable. These ideas appear in medieval and early modern writings. Across cultures, from Europe to South America to the ancient world. Then something happens. After the early 1800s, references don't get disproven. They don't get debated. They simply disappear. Libraries reorganize. Curricula change. Alchemy is removed from natural philosophy and replaced with modern chemistry. By 1850, Stone softening is dismissed as folklore, despite the stone itself still standing in plain sight. Now widen the lens, look at global architecture between 1880 and 1920, Madrid's Palacio de Comunications. Organic stone facades with flowing curves that wrap corners seamlessly, no joints, no breaks. Repeated decorative elements that are identical down to the millimeter. That's not hand carving. That's molding. The Woolworth Building in New York. Terracotta ornamentation so delicate it should have failed after a few freeze-thaw cycles, yet it survived over a century. Chicago, Philadelphia, Budapest, Prague, same period. Same signatures. Then the techniques stop again. And now Tartaria enters the conversation, not as a clearly defined empire, but as a placeholder for a lost knowledge system. Old maps consistently label vast regions as Tartaria. Then the name vanishes after the mid-1800s. What replaces it are buildings attributed to local builders using methods that don't match the available tools. The Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, 96. Identical granite columns, each carved from a single piece. Perfectly uniform. Patience does not explain industrial-level precision. Skill does not explain coordination at that scale. Something else does. When the veiled statues are examined under raking light, something extraordinary appears. Not chisel marks. Not tool scratches. Compression lines. As if actual fabric was pressed into softened stone, leaving a permanent impression once the material rehardened. What if the veils aren't stone carved to look like cloth, but cloth fossilized into stone through controlled chemistry? That would explain everything. The translucence, the thinness, the perfect drape, the impossibility. It would also explain why the technique vanished. Because chemistry can be erased? Formulas can be destroyed. Knowledge can be suppressed. Notice the pattern. Great fires. Destroyed archives. Lost records. Moscow 1812. Chicago 1871. San Francisco 1906. Buildings survive. Documents don't, and when those buildings are finally demolished, it happens quietly, without analysis. Without preservation. We are told this is progress, but maybe obsolete doesn't mean inferior. Maybe it means inconvenient. The sculptures remain. The stone remembers. And once you see the veils, once you recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it. The question isn't whether this technology existed. The evidence answers that. The real question is, who decided we weren't allowed to remember it?